What's up, everybody? Thank you for listening to the Whatcast. How's it going, everyone? Mike, how you doing, dude?
I'm just Ducky, Mateo.
Nice. We just had a nice talk with our friend Miss Nikki on a Discord at a hangout.
Yeah, every month we do that. First Friday of every month, we get on Discord, hang out with people. Well, with our patrons specifically. It's not open, guys. I'm sorry, but if you want to join Patreon, you can get on that and join us for the hangouts every month, and also enjoy some extra content. So those weeks where we don't have a show out, there's stuff over there to listen to. We got a bunch of stuff there now. So I think we did just last week we put out 2 new episodes on Discord. So, or not Discord, Patreon. You know the thing. Anyway, if that sounds like something that would float your boat, I triple dog dare you to go do it.
Well said, sir.
Thank you.
All right, so tonight we got an interesting one tonight. This sounds fairly strange from your quick description earlier.
Yeah, I'm working on putting together just to give you guys a little. We'll play a little inside baseball here, but to give you guys a preview of what's ahead, I'm working on putting together. I think it's going to be a couple of shows on Mothman sightings and flying humanoids around the Lake Michigan area. So that's something I've been working on, but in the meantime, we still have to have shows. So I was looking for something that would be kind of different from what we usually cover, and but also still fucking weird because we're the Whatcast, and if I was just doing not weird stuff, then what the hell's the point? Why are we here? It's bullshit. So I came across these stories. I wanted to kind of have a theme because I don't want to be all William Nilliam here and do all sorts of random shit, but I've got 2 stories of these historical figures that by some were considered wizards.
Ooh, one of our favorites, wizardry.
Yeah. There's no wizard wars here though.
How about wizard payment?
One of them wasn't a wizard at all.
Sacrilege.
It's one of those things where like he lived in an area with a lot of uneducated people, so the things that he was doing appeared to be like magic. So they thought he was like an evil wizard who could summon lightning, and I'll get into his story. But the first one I want to talk about is a man named Daniel Douglas Home. He was born in 1833, so this is a older case. But he was, I guess I don't know, like if you'd call him a psychic or a medium, but he displayed abilities beyond a normal man.
Ooh, like web shooters or what are you talking?
Yeah, like web shooters. He could turn invisible. He could shoot lasers out of his eyes. So, crazy shit for the 1800s. People never saw lasers before, let alone lasers shooting out of a dude's eyes. He used to blast squirrels out of trees. And, he was kind of a dick.
That's what he did with his laser powers. He's like, see that squirrel?
Yeah. And like, oh my God, what was that? And he's like, lasers. And like, what the fuck are lasers? And then he looks at them, what the fuck are you? And he blasts them with his laser and they explode. Yeah. So Daniel Douglas Home was a murderer from a very young age, blasting people with lasers left and right. So his powers were more of the psychic or telekinetic ability.
Ooh.
But there's not too much that we really know about his early life, but we know that he was the eighth child in the home family. And when he was 4, he claimed to start being able to see in his mind pictures of future events. But it was all like related to things that he would have no idea of, in the life of a 4-year-old. So it was weird that he would say he saw these visions when he doesn't even know about the things he's describing. But it turned out that his mother was a clairvoyant and had a bit of a gift for mediumship. And she comes from a line of seers that traditionally were in the Highlands of Scotland. So this ability, I guess, runs in the family. But because he was the 8th child in the family, his family wasn't, they were broke basically, and they could not afford an 8th child. So for a while he went to live with his aunt, who she actually raised him from the time he was 4 or 5 till he was 9, when his parents moved to America, and his aunt brought him to America so he could be with his family who had moved to Connecticut. By the mid 1800s, he had started to really kind of adapt the idea of spiritualism at the time. One of the main factors in the spiritualist movement was the Fox sisters. Are you familiar with them at all?
No.
So the Fox sisters it was 3 sisters, but the 2 youngest would use, they first started when they were younger by tricking their older sister and their mom, but their mom, or their older sister, I guess, later got involved as well. But they were allegedly mediums who were able to contact the dead, and they would produce these knocking noises. But it started when they were kids. They would use this apple on the floor of their room to trick their mother into thinking that there was a ghost or something. And they brought they continued this and ended up making a living out of it. But they would always do seances. It would always be a very controlled setting. Like they would do their seances in their house, and it was always in the dark, and they were able to control the entirety of the seance experience. And they were primarily known for just getting responses using knocks, and that's like what they were famous for. And they made a pretty comfortable living doing that. They were actually pretty close to where I live. They're like an hour and a half away. In Rochester, New York, which is it's one of the bigger cities in New York, but that they kind of made a name for themselves in the Rochester area to begin with, and would conduct seances, and they were just really taking advantage of people, I think, with these, by controlling the whole seance and not giving anything away, because it's all dark and everything. So they would just do these knocks, and people were like, "Oh my God, where are these knocks coming from? Oh my God!" And they were able to just trick a lot of people. But the thing is, like, they held on to this notion that they actually had abilities, and there were a bunch of skeptics that were basically dragging them, saying that they were frauds and they were committing all these, or I shouldn't say commit. They were creating all these noises themselves, and they would do tests. Like, they found that a lot of the knocking noises would typically come from under where they were sitting, and they would usually be on a wooden floor, sitting with a wooden table and on a wooden chair. They tried to put the sisters on a couch with pillows under their feet, and they couldn't replicate the sounds. So it started to be speculated that what they were doing was cracking the joints of their toes and knocking their knees together to make these noises. And it was later, much later, I think it was their cousins, one of their cousins signed a statement admitting that she was an accomplice during their seances, and she would really like discreetly touch the sisters when a noise needed to be made. So that was their signal. And she confirmed that what they would do would be they would snap their toes and pop the joints in their knees and ankles to make the noises. So I tell you the backstory of these sisters because they were the forerunners of the spiritualist movement, which was later picked up by Madame Blavatsky, and she had her own branch of it. But they were like the ones that started it, and Daniel became obsessed with it and really adopted the ideals of spiritualism. But as he got older, his power seemed to increase. So by the time he was in his late teens, he started manifesting knocking sounds in his house. And at first it frightened his family, and they were kind of freaked out, thinking like, are there ghosts in the house? Why is there knocking? He never admitted that it was him. There were just these weird knocking noises. And then furniture in the house started to move on its own. And all this poltergeist activity started happening. And eventually his family started putting two and two together, that these things only happened in the house when Daniel was there. Nothing happened if Daniel wasn't in the house. At one point, his aunt said that she saw him with kind of grinning at one point as a dining room chair was chasing one of his family members. At that point, she realized he was behind this, and not only was it manifesting through him, he was likely controlling it. So they actually ended up kicking him out of the house because of it. They said he was no longer welcome to live with them in the house. So he from that point, he would go from place to place, stay with friends if he was able, or just kind of stay wherever he was able to. But ended up being that this was one of the best things for him. As he was out wandering, he started making a living performing seances. And his seances were very similar to a lot of the seances at the time in terms of the activity that would be created. He would do the whole going into a trance thing. He would produce knocking sounds. He would emanate spirit voices and cause the table to lift and move. But the difference between what he would do and what most mediums at the time would do is that he would go to people's houses and perform the seances. He wouldn't set up a seance setting. He would go into their homes and perform the seance. And another thing is that they were mostly done during the day. And if they weren't done during the day, he insisted that there be lights so that everything could be seen.
Fuck yeah, dude. That's the way you want this type of thing to be done, right?
Yeah.
I wonder if people at the time noticed, like, no, he's fucking coming here, bro. No hidden fucking spring traps in this shit.
Right. And it wasn't like with the Fox sisters where there was a group of them. This was just him. And he's performing these seances and this is how he's making his living and just going. He's like the wandering medium. You know, he just rolls into town. Who wants a seance? But he ended up becoming well known by a lot of really powerful, famous people. Queen Victoria herself was said to be an admirer of his. He had run-ins with Charles Dickens and different nobility and rich people in England at the time. He ended up moving back to England in 1855. But he was able to add to, I say add to, but I don't know if it was like his power got stronger or what, but he got to a point where he was able to manifest disembodied hands that would show up and then they would dematerialize. And he was also able to levitate himself and elongate his body.
Elongate his body like Mr. Fantastic? Or?
Yeah. I mean, not to that extreme, but yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. And there was a reporter who was writing a piece on him, and he was experiencing this seance or whatever was going on. But I want to read part of the article he wrote to cover what this reporter experienced when he had a seance with Daniel Home. I had hold of his hand at the time, and I felt his feet. They were lifted a foot off the floor. Again and again he was taken from the floor, and the third time he was carried to the lofty ceiling of the apartment, with which his hand and head came into gentle contact. There was another time he was called into a client's house to perform his seance or his show, or I don't know what the hell you want to call it. But the client's name was Mr. S.C. Hall. And when he arrived to do the seance, he actually flew into his home through a window on the 3rd floor. And then he floated around the room and then went through the window again and then landed on the ground a few feet away from his house.
Damn.
So he's performing all this crazy shit, doing all these tricks. And at the time, a lot of these, because of the spiritualist movement, people were making a lot of extraordinary claims, but a lot of it ended up amounting to tricks. And I think we talked about it in a previous episode a few months ago, with the mediums that were able to fake producing ectoplasm by like swallowing long strands of cheesecloth and then coughing them up because they were all wet. Yeah. Yeah,
I've heard of that before.
Yeah, it's all shit like that.
Real proppy, right? It's like it's like you see the pictures and you hear about the stories, and it's just like a mini stage with an array of props.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of it is. It's just they're tricking, they're duping these people by it's basically using stage magician tricks.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of these people were able to get away with it, but this guy ended up. So he started his career traveling around in northeastern United States. Then he moved back to Britain, and between 1855 and 1864, he traveled all across Europe, and he even went and visited the royal courts of Holland, France, Russia, and Prussia. He even had performed a seance for Napoleon III and had an audience with the Pope at one point.
Wow. But
by 1871, he had become, basically this world-renowned psychic. And in 1871, a physicist and chemist named Sir William Crooks decided that he wanted to perform a scientific investigation on Daniel Home. So he subjected him to a number of tests to kind of really gauge whether this was a real phenomenon or if these were tricks.
Oh, right.
So one of the first one he set up was to test Daniel Home's ability to move things with his mind from a distance. So he just set up a spring balance on the opposite side of a room, and with barely any effort at all, Holmes was able to shift the balance. So then he told him to sit at a table, and then they put a closed copper cage on top of the table. Inside the cage was an accordion, and Crooks asked Holmes to use his mystical magical powers to play the accordion, and Holmes was able to do it. The accordion played by itself, but it was never touched. He was able to make it play.
Wow, no shit.
And then to further cement this point, Holmes gets up from the table and walks away while the music continues.
Whoa. So maybe he's got like a ghost partner?
Oh, maybe. Maybe somebody is drinking invisibility potion.
Ooh.
I don't know. Maybe he's just friends with ghosts. It's like, ghost, go play that accordion.
Yeah, it's like real life frighteners.
Yeah. That would be so awesome. But his next feat, I don't think he can explain by ghost friends.
Ooh.
He wanted to prove that he was able to produce an immunity to fire.
Whoa.
So Crooks had a fire going in the fireplace, and he walked over to the fire, reached his hand into the flames, pushed his hand down into the burning coals, and then began to stir the hot coals with his hand. And then he picked up a red hot coal, and according to Crooks, the coal itself was the size of an orange. And he picked up this coal, and he blew on it until it became white hot. And then he put the coal, after he got it white hot, he put the coal back down into the fire, and then pulled the hand back out, and there was no burns at all on his hand. So after this, Crooks he just cataloged all of the tests he put him through. So I'm just going to read through the different points that he made in his report, what Holmes was able to do in his presence. Unaccountable movement of heavy bodies with contact, but without physical pressure. So this would be like he could put his hand on, say, a dresser or something, or a wardrobe, and just put his hand on it and make it move without pushing against it. He just touches it and it moves. He was able to create currents in the air, so create breezes. He could change the temperature in the room or just an area of the room. He could create noises like knocking or scratching sounds, or what would sound like explosions. He could change the weight of objects. He was able to move furniture with no contact. He could levitate furniture without touching it. He was able to levitate himself. He was able to manipulate objects from a distance without touching it. He, as I mentioned before, was able to play musical instruments without touching it. He could create light. He was able to materialize hands in front of Crook. One of the hands actually held on to Crook's hands, and he said he was determined not to let it go, so he held on to it as much as he could. And he said that there was no struggle or effort from the hand to get loose, but the hand just kind of disappeared into a vapor and faded from within the grasp of his own hand.
Whoa.
Another thing he was able to do was create writing without touching any writing implements or having a pen, just have writing appear on paper. And then this one I'm curious about, but he just writes phantoms, period.
Whoa.
So I wonder if he was able to produce shadow people or something.
Right.
He was also able to demonstrate intelligence that could not be attributed through normal means. So he was able to talk about relations of people who were no longer alive and whom he would have no way of knowing. He was able to translocate from his position, and he could also create darting specks of light that would move around the room and land on people's heads.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, wizard.
Clearly a wizard.
I mean, this guy's doing like everything.
Yeah, all he needs to do is fucking shoot lightning bolts out of his fingers. He can levitate. He can move shit. Like, give this guy a lightsaber and he's a goddamn Jedi.
Right? I mean, like he's almost like like a new X-Men.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And all in front of this doctor.
Yeah, and at the time, even though spirituality and this shit was popular, it wasn't accepted by science as being a real thing. You know, it was thought to be like a flight of fancy or something that bored rich people would indulge in for entertainment, not anything that was actually real. And this guy went out and put his reputation on the line. Again, he was a physicist and a chemist. So it's not like he was like a parapsychologist or something. Like, this dude was a legit scientist trying to like explain the mysteries of the universe. And he wrote in his official report that Holmes' psychic power was connected with the human organization, which he dubbed the psychic force. And he was completely ridiculed by his peers because of this.
Oh,
yeah. But Daniel Holmes was never, no one ever was able to prove that he was a fraud. And unfortunately, at the age of 40, he got tuberculosis. And with the tuberculosis, all of his abilities seemed to cease.
Weird.
And then he ended up dying in 1886. But there have been several people that have tried to find evidence to prove that he was a hoaxer, that he was fraudulent. But nobody has been able to really prove that he was making any of this up.
That's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
There's obviously some things that could be fate, but I mean, that's a lot of stuff that's just straight up unexplainable.
Yeah. Like, how do you put your hand, for one, through a flame and then hold on to a coal? Like, he wasn't juggling the coal. He was holding on to the coal and then blowing on it to make it hotter. And then he put his hand back through the flames to set the coal back down. Like, how do you fake that? Especially in front of a scientist.
Yeah.
And like I said, all of his seances were done at the person's home during the day in well-lit areas. Maybe, I mean, he was able to produce hands. What if those, the killer hands that we talked about recently are magic spells?
Assassin spells?
Yeah. They just cast a deadly hand spell and murder fools.
That guy's got a lot going on, though. I mean,
yeah,
I see why the people call him a wizard. It goes beyond like a medium, you know, a psychic.
Yeah, because I mean, he was doing all the medium stuff, but then like, what do you call this other stuff? You know, and like, how much of it was a show? Like, did he really go into a spirit trance, or was that just part of his show? And you know, like, you know, use a little bit of showmanship, but you're utilizing your powers, but it adds to the experience because you go into the trance, and you know, that's what people expect. I wonder if he needed to do that or if he was just doing it as part of the show.
Right.
The world may never know. So the next character I want to talk about is about 100 years earlier. Not quite 100 years, but close enough. Andrew Cross was a kid born into a rich family in 1784. But he was a child prodigy, and he actually was able to master the ancient Greek language at the age of 8.
Whoa.
When he was 9, he was sent to Dr. Sayers' school at Bristol in England, which was a school for gifted children. At 12, he became obsessed with what at the time was new to science, electricity. And utilizing, I guess, early circuitry, he would wire up the metal doorknobs in classrooms to give his teachers an electrical shock when they, like, nothing serious, just like a little bzz, like a joy buzzer or whatever. But he was known for pranking his teachers with these electrical wiring. I don't know exactly how he did it, but without them knowing, I should say, because they had to be wired to an electrical accumulator and then wired to the door. But he was able to do it without them knowing, and I'm sure to the delight of all his classmates. But he never outgrew his obsession with electricity. And think about it at the time. This is the late 1700s, and electricity is still very new. It's got to seem almost like magic,
right?
It's
very
it's
much
so new, and it's nature, but you're able to harness it to do things, to create electrical currents. And so he was obsessed with this. And then in 1805, his mother died, and he inherited the family wealth as well as their land and estates. So he ended up using a huge sum of that money to develop this huge laboratory on his family land. And he began to conduct these electrical experiments. And the people in the area surrounding his estate would watch as he would conduct these experiments. And again, electricity is very new, so your average backwoods, uneducated individual would not understand being able to harness electricity. And what he would do was he would conduct electricity from lightning that would gather during a storm, and they would watch these forks of lightning strike down and hit this network of copper cables that he had set up. And to them, it looked like he was summoning lightning down from the sky and pulling it into his home. But what he was actually doing was using the high voltages from the lightning strikes to power these electrical experiments that he was doing. And he began to notice that these certain types of crystals would be formed when an electrical current would be passed through certain mineral solutions. And he began to take notes about his experiments. And most of it centered around these crystals being created when electricity would strike minerals in a liquid. But there was one experiment entry that he wrote about in 1837. It's kind of hard to follow the way he wrote it, so I'm going to kind of try to explain it as best as I can. But what he did was he created this wooden frame and then had a wooden funnel that he put inside of it. And inside of the funnel, the funnel would be inside of a quart-sized basin, and the quart-sized basin would sit on top of a piece of mahogany wood. And he would fill the basin with liquid, and then he took a piece of flannel that was wetted with the same liquid. So again, the liquid, it was typically a water and mineral solution. And he dipped the flannel in the solution, and then he would suspend it over the side of the basin. And then inside the funnel, the funnel would act as a siphon, and it would pull the liquid out of the basin through the funnel using drops. And the drops would fall into a smaller funnel that was placed beneath it. And then it would be, it would drip onto this piece of red oxide, and then he would electrify that stone. What he noticed was he would repeat the experiment day after day, and on the 14th day, he observed through a magnifying glass these, what he described as whitish nipples that were protruding from the stone that he was electrifying.
Oh, yeah.
White nipples on a stone.
Stipples. Stone nipples.
Yeah. Milky stone nipples.
Oh.
Gross. On the 18th day, these nipples became enlarged. And from out of the enlarged projections, he described 7 or 8 filaments that came out of it, and each of them grew longer than the projection from which they were coming from. So he continued to observe these, and on the 26th day, these filaments that were sticking out and the nipples took on the form of an insect that was, he said, it was standing erect on the bristles which now formed its tail. And then on the 28th day, these insects started to move their legs. And a few days after they started to move their legs, they detached themselves from the stone and began to move around autonomously.
Whoa.
So he obviously was completely baffled and amazed by this experiment, and he could not find a rational explanation for how these insects were created. So what he did was repeated the experiment, and he recorded the outcome in his logbook. And I'll read the excerpt from that entry. After many months' action and consequent formation of certain crystalline matters, I observed similar excrescences. Is that even a fucking word?
Excrete? Is it like a play on excretions?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Maybe it's just an old-timey word. I don't know.
Right.
I observed similar excrescences with these before described at the edge of the fluid in every one of the cylinders, except 2 which contained the carbonate of potassa and metallic arsenic. So it was just a different solution than what he was using before.
Okay.
I think he was furthering his experiments because most of them involved the same solution, but he had these other 2 that had a different solution. So in his first experiment, he used flannel, wood, and a volcanic stone, and he replicated that again. And again, he was the insects appeared, which they're like, when I say insect, don't picture like a beetle or something. They're these little mites, and they came to be known as Akari. But it seemed to him that it ran completely against everything he knew about biology.
Everything?
And yeah. So he did the experiment a 3rd time. And on the 3rd time, he omitted on the inside a resting place for the Akari, which was the flannel on the inside. And so this time when he did it and they broke free, they ended up falling down into the solution and drowning. But he was again able to replicate it again, and all of them except for 1 ended up dying because they fell back into the solution because he didn't give them the flannel to rest on. So Andrew Cross wrote up a detailed report of his discovery, and he sent it to the Electrical Society in London. Obviously, when he wrote this up, it was looked at very skeptically. So what the society ended up doing was having one of their most respected experimenters try to replicate this. So this guy named W.H. Weeks set up to do the same experiment, but he was more careful than Cross when he was setting up the experiment. He thoroughly sterilized everything in the lab, worked under quarantine conditions to make sure there was no outside contaminants. And after conducting the experiments, W.H. Weeks also produced these same insects.
No way.
So with this other electrical experimenting scientist able to replicate this under lab conditions that were thoroughly sterilized, attention was turned to Andrew Cross, who originated the experiment. And they end up naming these mites Acarus crossi after Andrew Cross, because he referred to them as Acari, so they called him Acarus and Crossi. So all of a sudden this guy is being held where people were before skeptical of him, they're now calling him a genius.
Right.
But then the religious authorities step in, and he's creating life. So only God can create life. So the only explanation is that Andrew Cross is dealing with the devil.
Oh.
And the devil's giving him the ability to create life in order to set him up as a rival of God. So these ultra-religious people now think that he's in league with the devil, and he shows up back at his family home, and the locals in the area start throwing stones at him. They murdered his livestock. They set fire to his crops. The local Reverend Philip Smith, who was like one of the leading people who were calling him out as being a servant of the devil, he conducted a exorcism on this dude's property.
Jesus.
But sadly, things didn't turn out well for Andrew Cross, and in 1855, he passed away after he had a paralytic seizure. But he was able to utter one last sentence before he died, and his last words were, "The utmost extent of human knowledge is but comparative ignorance."
Ooh.
And so today, in modern times, there's no explanation for how these things were created. But what's crazier is that no scientist in modern times is willing to reproduce this experiment.
Willing?
Yeah, it has not been reproduced.
I mean, shit, why do you think that is?
I'm guessing that it's likely due to ridicule that they would face as a result. I think so much time has gone by that it's probably looked at as being like an urban legend now. You know, and I think it would be like they would think it would be silly to attempt it, maybe.
Or get in trouble by the church?
I wouldn't think that would be so much of a concern in modern times,
right?
Yeah. I think it's probably more the idea, think of it like an adult doing Bloody Mary. You know, you just feel silly doing it.
Right.
Or it's just an urban legend. You know, why do it? Of course it's not going to work. It's just fucking silly. And that's like the equivalent of a scientific urban legend. And it's just silly to do.
Mm-hmm. I got to say, that is extremely fascinating. What do you think's going on there?
Well, it really could just be an urban legend. I don't know the background of this W.H. Weeks character. I haven't looked into him, to be completely honest. But he was trusted enough by the Electrical Society to conduct this experiment. Like, he was their most trustworthy guy. But then again, like I said, this story is well over 200 years old. So maybe it's one of those things where it's just a made up name, and it's like, hey, this guy was the guy at the time, but there's no one to back that claim up. It's just like, it could have been any name. You know, it could have been John Farthington. It's just a name that was made up to further the story.
Yeah, fill in the blanks.
Yeah. So it's really hard to say because it's such an old case, but I thought it was pretty interesting because this Andrew Cross guy apparently was a real dude. So there's this story of his bugs.
I bet nobody will reproduce that experiment because one of the original, crystalline bugs, we'll call them, just grew and grew and grew and dove into the sea. And that's pretty much like responsible for all sea monsters.
I mean, to me, when I was reading the excerpts from his experiment logs, I could easily see it becoming like a story written by Lovecraft, where you just have these scientists working on these experiments for some new technology, and they end up creating this life, but it's not really creating the life. What they were doing was creating a gateway using the electricity, and the first thing to come through, because he was using a small container, were these insects.
Ooh.
But then he starts using larger containers, which allows bigger things to come through. And thinking in his ignorance that he's by using bigger receptacles, that it's just allowing him to create bigger life forms, he decides to set up the biggest receptacle, and it dominates this entire room. And then he produces the experiment, and out from the depths of this huge pot or bucket or barrel, whatever the hell he's using, comes this mass of writhing tentacles and eyes and mouths, just erupts out of this thing, and all of a sudden you got these fucking his house is invaded by Shoggoths, and there's nothing he can do, and he gets eaten alive.
Yep, maybe it's like them slamming those particles together with that, what is it, the super hadron?
The Large Hadron Collider?
Yeah, maybe it's something on that level to where it's some weird old alchemy thing. Like, oh yeah, you can create a certain level of life by doing things like this.
Yeah.
So fucking weird. I mean, that's such a weird story, dude. I didn't know what you're going to cover tonight, and I have to say that's fucking bizarre.
Yeah, because it really is like one of those weird things where like science and magic overlaps, because you can't explain it. Like, you're trying to use science to explain what happens, but really it's fucking magic.
Well, yeah, science is why it's there. That's what caused it to exist, was science itself.
It's such a weird case.
Yeah.
What if his paralytic seizure was because one of those mites ended up embedding itself in his brain?
Right, it went into his bloodstream and just rode the wave.
And that's what ended up killing him, was his own creation.
Yeah, he's like,
Murdward.
You killed waves of my family.
Yeah. Yep, it was that one surviving specimen that didn't fall into the solution and die. It somehow got out and hitched a ride at him. He was like, "You shall pay for the massacre you caused, fool. I may be small, but I can destroy you." And then it crawls in his ear and fucking eats its way to the center of his brain.
And then explodes.
Yep. Taking his body with him. It's like, see you in hell, fucker.
Thank you for listening to the Whatcast. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, iTunes, and YouTube. Enjoy the podcast. Get yourself a Whatcast t-shirt or a sticker pack. Who was that dude on that one episode? Try the links in Homie's page. All this and more can be found at www.thewhatcasters.com. Thanks again for listening and have a great week.